In today's society, information creates economic opportunity. On this edition of Digital Journey, host John Gage investigates bandwidth and the small community.
Knowledge is power, said Francis Bacon at the beginning of the scientific age. Today, bandwidth is power. Power from faster and greater access to digitized information. A rural town in America's heartland, Nevada, Missouri, is reinventing itself by establishing a state-of-the-art telecommunications center. Farmers have even learned to sell soybeans on the World Wide Web. I'm John Gage. Join me for this digital journey into bandwidth democracy.
Nevada, Missouri. Population 9,500. This is the story of how one American town became a living laboratory for the networked community of the 21st century.
Behind me is the site of America's first televillage.
An inspiration rising from desperate times.
We were reeling from the loss of so many jobs when the state hospital closed, almost 1,000 jobs, which was really crippling to our economy.
Committed to preventing the town's demise, the locals sought advice. The state sent a consultant, Howard Jacks.
The thought was that we would bring Nevada closer to Kansas City with the use of advanced telecommunications. And of course, by bringing it close to Kansas City, we also would bring it closer to the world.
The consultants proposed the creation of an advanced telecommunications system, including a telecommunity, telecenter, and teleincubator. Parts of the abandoned state mental hospital would be used to house the project.
The first time Alan Kenyon took me through that building, it had been abandoned and hadn't been used for, I think, years. And I shook my head and said, "This is where you're going to put the telecenter, right?" And he said, "Yeah." Well, 4 months later when I came back, I just couldn't believe the distance that they'd come.
The telecenter began as an idea in late 1994, early 1995. And essentially we saw it as a way of using technology to bring education, job training, business opportunities to rural America.
The internet connectivity in this building has 125 connections with the IP-based system that we have.
Now the buzzword is bandwidth, and nearly everyone in Nevada knows what that means.
The more we have, the faster we can interact. With full T1, it's very quick, it's very efficient, it looks almost like your television.
The telecenter provides a linkage between education and economic development. By providing the educational resources that people need throughout the state and in the rural areas, we have a reason for our children to stay home in their home areas, in their hometowns.
Not far from the telecenter, Nevada's Redevelopment Committee is embarking on the second part of the digital project, one that may serve as a prototype for information age residential planning. It is known as a telecommunity or televillage.
The Televillage project is a residential development specifically designed to accommodate home-based business workers and teleworkers, telecommuters. It incorporates a physical design that provides for a social environment for those individuals.
The longer we have these facilities available throughout the country, the more viable they become for individuals wanting to work at home.
Also attracting entrepreneurs to the quality of life in Nevada, there's a planned teleincubator, low-cost space in a digitally networked facility for small and emerging businesses.
We'd like to create a seamless web so people can move either physically or electronically between those environments. I think when we see technology being used in a rural area like this, we're really seeing the best and perhaps the only future for rural America.
Is technology truly the answer or a pathway for rural America, and for that matter, for rural communities around the world? I'm joined today by two experts. Michael Schumann's most recent book, Going Local, treats the policies that are necessary to follow by local governments for local economic development. And Peter Schwartz's most recent book, The Art of the Long View, discusses how to think about the future, economic development, economic policy. Let me begin with you, Michael. Is it true that the application of technology, as they seem to think in Nevada, will transform the town? Is there hope?
Well, it's really too early to tell, John. I think there are two scenarios one can see with this. One scenario would be very consistent with principles of community development. That is, the principle of ownership and the principle of self-reliance. You could imagine the technology being used to develop a whole range of new kinds of businesses in the community that enhanced the local tax base and allowed people to access more finance and a broader diversity of products. On the other hand, you could imagine many of the people in the home businesses being attached to businesses hundreds or thousands of miles away, which means that most of the economic benefit from this kind of work would still be enjoyed by the community where those businesses were truly based. The other thing that could happen is you could have an exacerbation of the kind of Walmart effect. We saw in this little video clip that downtown area has been doing very poorly. One reason for that is that mass marketing kinds of stores like Walmart set up on the edge of these communities and deliver much cheaper goods and services. You could imagine that the telecommuters would use the internet to buy many more goods and services by the internet, which would bring the locus of economic goods and services even further away from the community.
I think your several scenarios are possible, but you asked an important question, John, in the sense, is this the only hope? And I think the answer is yes, it is, because the alternative is worse. That is, in effect, these communities are going to be decimated by the transformation of the global economy, by the radical improvements in efficiency of production, by the massive new distribution systems. They have to find a new value proposition in the world economy. And what they've got is people, and they've got lifestyle and a good way of life. And if they can offer that as an important resource to people who want those, and then still enable them to be effective economic actors in a world economy, then they've got a possibility. So this critical infrastructure of telecommunications that enables them to play in a world marketplace, I actually do think is their best hope. It may not succeed, and it certainly won't succeed in all places. I think these guys have a pretty good shot. They're early. They've got some good infrastructure. They've got a lot of support and subsidy in that respect. So they've got a shot at success in that respect. But I think without it, they're almost certainly doomed to failure.
I agree with you that it offers a hope. Whether it offers the best hope is an open question. One of the things that I was disappointed to see in the tape is that there wasn't an open public discussion early on that asked, were all of these public benefits, and we know from looking at this example that there were tax abatements and subsidies that came from various state agencies to make this experiment possible. Was this the best expenditure of public money in order to generate new economic development in the community? It may turn out to be, but the fact that there wasn't an open public discussion where many different businesses could put proposals on the table raises the question for me about whether it was the best use of those resources.
But, you know, it does seem to me when I think about the alternatives, okay, I've seen a lot of communities try to redevelop themselves. Tourism is a standard kind of opportunity. So we're going to make this a great tourist center. We're going to have a theme park or something like that there. What I find powerful here is that they're actually building on the real resources of this community. It's not something artificial. It's not arbitrary. And yes, there might have been alternatives. I can imagine that there might have been other things. But here they've actually taken some initiative. They are actually doing something. They actually do have a shot at it. In some ways, it may not be the very best. There might be, if they had parsed it slightly differently, some other alternatives. Having said that, I think this looks like at least a good alternative.
It's great to see a community like Nevada taking the initiative and having a public discussion, having any public discussion about the future of economic development. Let me raise, though, one other concern that I have about what they're doing, and that is there's a big emphasis on outsiders coming into the community. There's been some studies from the 1970s that suggest that, in fact, in states where there's been a lot of job growth, in fact, per capita income growth has grown much more slowly. And in states where there was a very slow job growth. In fact, income growth was much higher. And it's because the inflow and outflow of people in different areas often hits a community in very unpredictable ways. And I don't think there's been quite enough thought about how you bring people into the community and develop the infrastructure and the related businesses around it that generate equal and well-distributed development in that community.
So the notion in Nevada that they would attract people to Nevada to do business on the network because they have the network infrastructure, thereby requiring those apartments to be built, that residential section, all of that has perhaps a hidden infrastructure cost they may not be considering in their long-term.
It will absolutely have a hidden infrastructure cost. It still could be positive for development, but there needs to be an enormous amount of planning and thinking about how you're going to take care of these other costs. Now, one of the ways that I think this will or could be taken care of positively is to think more creatively about rural development. One of the things I see happening nationally right now is that the lines between the urban on the one hand and the rural on the other are blurring. You're seeing, say, in places like Detroit, the growth of urban agriculture, and you're seeing in many rural communities more creative thought about how you can transform agriculture and forestry waste into potential replacements for the petrochemical business. I think all of these things bode very positively for economic opportunity.
Michael, in the middle of the 19th century, 100 years ago, people thought about what it would be like to communicate across some communication line, at that point telegraph and the beginning of telephone, so that you could have teachers in one place teach people in other places. Now we see in Missouri an example of this. What's the future for this technology? Are they obsolescent at the moment of implementing something, or are they learning other skills by implementing?
I think one way to look at the question is who gains and who loses. Clearly there are students and people who are potential students, adults in mid-career, who benefit from distance learning. They tend to be the smarter and more self-motivated kinds of students. So I think that those people in Nevada are going to love these facilities and get an enormous amount out of the distance learning. The problem is that the people who are on the lower end of the rung have more difficulty learning. They are the ones who still need human intervention. You need people to support you while you're learning, to ask the hard questions, to give you encouragement when you're having difficulty with the material. And I fear that too much reliance on just the technology without thinking about how do you have reinforcing human teachers is a problem here.
I think, however, there's another side to this. You know, look, I think there is a risk of technological obsolescence. In fact, not even a risk, an almost certainty, okay? That almost anything that they buy today will be fairly obsolete pretty quickly. But I think what they are learning are new habits. And I think that was implicit in many of what they were saying. Basically, they're learning the habits of innovation. They're learning the habits of connection to the world. They're learning the habits of change, of self-motivation, rather than simply tradition, staying put, relative isolation, and so on. So that as the technology changes, those new cultural habits that this community is developing, I think will serve them well to be able to adopt the subsequent generations of technology. But the technology they've got in hand almost certainly is going to be dated the day they put it in place.
For transcripts, multimedia files, and worldwide links, click www.djourney.com.
Agriculture oftentimes is depicted in sitcoms and so forth as the Green Acres guy with the overalls and the pitchfork. And that is a really poor picture of agriculture. Agriculture is highly technical, and technology is bringing a lot of advances in agriculture that provides great opportunities and a lot of excitement.
Farmers here are as excited as the rest of the town about the new telecenter.
Right now, I'd say between 60 and 75% of what I want to call my full-time farmers use home computers. Probably 15% have internet access, and that number is increasing. Along with that, we're also seeing an increase in global positioning systems where we can monitor the yield for various crops in specific points in the field, throughout the field.
Computers are almost on board every combine, tractor, sprayer, any type of farm equipment anymore, and they record what we do out here.
Steve Cubbage is a fourth-generation farmer. He went off to college and got a degree in journalism, but the land drew him back.
Our family farm was started here in Vernon County in the late 30s during the Great Depression.
Grandpa survived the Dust Bowl. Now Steve believes that employing state-of-the-art agricultural technology is the key to prosperity.
One of the examples is some of the smart machines is just in the irrigation technology that we've basically merged the computer and irrigation machinery. And one of the ways we do that is basically a communication device.
System is running forward. Threat, location 203. Rate is 19%.
It allows me to speed it up, turn it on, turn it off, and it works very efficiently for our operation. We can control multiple units of these at one time with just a single handheld device like this.
The combination of embedded devices with computer networking gives Steve tools Granddad never had.
It turns it into digital data, digital information, recording herbicide use, varieties planted, the yield that we eventually make from this field. And that's information that can come right on your computer that you can download, and you can share that with experts saying, this is what my land can produce, and here is proof in living color.
Dairy farmer Bill Hedges is the first to admit he's not on the leading edge, but he is intrigued by what he's heard about computerized dairy feeders.
That allows you, if you want to go that route, to control exactly how much you feed each cow. I know up in Butler, just north of us, there's one farm that's got all that set in, and the cows come in, they identify them, and that weighs the milk each time.
He's already come to the telecenter to market his hay over the internet.
People can look and see if somebody's wanting hay, where is hay available and what kind, and they can call you. It's a lot easier than trying to do like they did a few years ago when they published a hard copy of the hay directory. We only had one opportunity to get in that. This is something you can do any time of the year.
In the past, if they wanted information, they would have to contact me or the University of Missouri. We would track down that information, photocopy it, and give it to them in hard copy. But now, the time savings is tremendous, and the access to the amount of information has increased substantially. If I want to raise soybeans in southwest Missouri to be exported to Japan, I can go to the Ministry of Japan's webpage and get the requirements for those soybeans so I know where I'm at and if I do want to pursue it or not. That information is critical, and that's what the type of information that will keep us competitive.
Technology basically has allowed me to come back and not give up my other career as an agriculture journalist. There's no better place to be writing about agriculture than on a farm. It's kind of the best of both worlds.
Expand your television. www.djourney.com.
In changing the way that people apply information technology to a rural economy, are there other areas where new technologies might change the costs of production, possibly the profits to the farmers or producers?
Well, I think a lot of different technologies can be helpful to the farmer. As we were talking about, for example, thinking about value-added technologies that may be in slightly different industries that you can build on the farm actually would help income coming back to the farmer. For example, the development of wind power or the development of processing industries that take agricultural and forestry waste and convert that into industrial input chemicals. That brings more value to the farmer. Now, granted, there are additional kinds of inputs the farmer has to put into some of those things, but it turns out that it's really quite small in addition to what the farmer is already doing. And in the video, we also saw a funny kind of value added too. Here was a farmer that in fact was also a journalist. And so farming was not his complete life. His life was also gathering information about the life and the economics of farming and reporting it to the broader world. I think that is also a very viable form of value-added activity.
And I think there was another one, too, that I was really struck by, and that was the electronic hay market. You know, I mean, in England, of course, there's a place called the Hay Market. What was it about? Selling of hay. And so here was a farmer producing hay that was wanted in the region. It used to be an awkward transaction, a difficult, costly transaction. What's happened is that information technology has made that an efficient marketplace. It's allowed buyer and seller to find each other more easily and make possible local commerce that could only have been done very difficult, with great difficulty in the past.
So there's a decentralization of production. Does the information infrastructure help this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're seeing that in a lot of places, that the economies of scale are changing, the economies of distribution are changing, and it's IT that is a very powerful force in a lot of that. Information technology is enabling people to manage everything from inventories to complex distribution networks from highly distributed systems. And I think that becomes a very, very powerful force for distributing production and distribution in completely new ways.
Well, now, the value add for agriculture in each of the stages, from production through distribution, where are the biggest changes possible?
Well, go ahead.
Well, one of the changes that I've been looking at recently is wind power. The Department of Energy has been looking at how they could build wind machines on farms and contribute to value added of that particular resource. And, you know, there's an obstacle to it, which is finance, and the Department of Energy has been thinking about how you can develop secondary credit markets to finance these things. But I think, you know, we tend to think of farms as simply we are producing food and someone else takes care of the business. In fact, farms have a rich resource of land and a rich resource of labor and a rich potential resource of the marketing and packaging of goods for local or even global markets. And I think we need to be much more creative about the opportunities in rural areas.
In the process of accumulating the information about the production on the farmer can change his relationship with those that provide financing by saying, here's the proof of what my productivity has been on the farm, therefore lend me money against next year's crop. Do you see efficiencies in the financial resources that can be used by rural areas?
There are potential efficiencies, but I would argue that there is no other place besides finance where the double-edged quality of the internet and mass communication is apparent. Because on the one hand, it is true that farmers could have access to finance and access to global markets and access to equity investors and so forth, and all of that is very positive. On the other hand, what we have seen in the financial sector is a dramatic transformation, mergers, acquisitions, banks getting larger, and the closure of branches in rural communities. This is a very big problem. And so we've got to think about how can we use the internet to create new kinds of community banks, perhaps linked to new kinds of credit unions, new kinds of local banks that see this as an important market niche and recycle the savings that come from local farmers back into the rural community.
Yeah, you know, but I think you've gone to an important place with that in the sense of creating new kinds of financial mechanisms, and I think that's really quite critical. We have the image of kind of the benign local banker who may have disappeared, but not all such bankers were benign. Right. You know, the image of the farmer thrown off his land by that benign local banker is also true.
Right, it was not so wonderful life.
Yeah, it was not so wonderful life all the time. And what it means is now that the farmer may have multiple sources of finance competing to provide him services, because in fact that farmer now has access to a world financial marketplace that is not simply constrained by a local banker. So it does go both ways. But there's the other additional side, and we've seen this now developing in much of the developing world, and that's microfinance. Microfinance is again made possible by information technology, i.e. the ability to manage very small-scale loans, aggregate them into portfolios, securitize those, sell those, and operate an efficient banking system at a micro scale. We've seen it in the development of lending for example, dairy farming. Several families together who couldn't otherwise afford a cow, buying a cow. Then we saw the second generation of that. There's a wonderful guy in Bangladesh named Iqbal Qadir. And Iqbal saw this cow being sold. He said, gee, that cow could be a cellular phone. And he said, I know, I'm going to create the cellular cow. And so what he did is actually arrange microcredits for women who would buy 5 cellular phones, lease service, and then resell that service, and created instantly a local phone infrastructure all over Bangladesh, and now has 8,000 local phone companies, i.e. One woman and 5 cellular phones operating out of a container, providing instant infrastructure for communications for those local communities that would not have been possible otherwise.
When you think about the ability of that farmer in Missouri to use the global positioning satellite in expensive embedded equipment, those were expensive
Sure.
tractors, expensive harvesters, measuring the yield as they cut down the crop. That same technology, of course, is passing through the farmer's body in Botswana at this moment. So the lessons learned about application of the technology to more efficient agriculture in the United States could have an impact on devices yet unused, uninvented, that could alter the way agriculture takes place in the rest of the world.
Yeah, I was really struck one day. I was in the Philippines. I was visiting a very small village. And when I say small village, a village almost exaggerates it. It was maybe 8, 9 houses. And one of the rudest and crudest was literally made of sticks. Okay, it was literally made of sticks. But yet out back was a satellite dish. And in the house was a television set. And they had a gasoline generator nearby to produce the electricity to run this. And everybody in there was watching TV. From the whole village had come into that one crude stick house to watch it. It says something about the priority that people will place on that kind of technology to be connected to the world, even at the lowest levels of income. Now, not everybody has a TV set. Not everybody will have a GPS device. Not everybody will have an internet access device. But somebody in the village will. There'll be 1, maybe 2, and they'll begin to share those resources, and they will be gradually, increasingly interconnected. Now, we're talking about a process here that really is a half-century process. This is not a 2-year, not a 5-year, not even a 10-year process. But it is the radical transformation of the patterns of commerce and engagement on a worldwide basis by the elaboration of this infrastructure. Just like the interstate highway system and the railways and so on produced in the United States, over a fairly long period of time, we're seeing that same phenomenon, I think, on a global basis now with telecommunications.
All of the materials concerning the subjects we've discussed on this broadcast, democratic bandwidth, economic development, and the localization and distribution of economic value, are on our website, the Digital Journey website. I'd like to thank Peter Schwartz. I'd like to thank Michael Schumann for your participation in today's broadcast. I'd like to thank you for being with us on this edition of Digital Journey. I'm John Gage.
Next, global economies are increasingly vulnerable to global weather disturbances. Orbiting satellites help scientists understand complex phenomena like El Niño and global warming.
From processing stock trades in the financial world to selling hits in the music world, from sharing information in government operations to medical operations, from the manufacturing of products to the interaction of products, from tracking packages to tracking spending. At Sun, our technologies power the net for business. We're the .com. What can we .com for you?